The roar of a jet engine, the sterile scent of recycled air, and the blur of 1,000 strangers in a hurry. This is the soundtrack of anonymity, a place where stories begin and end in the same breath. But on a crisp autumn afternoon at JFK's Terminal 4, a single piercing cry would shatter that anonymity forever. Two impeccably dressed twin girls, tears streaming down their faces, pointed at a boy with worn-out shoes and a threadbare jacket. Their words would stop travelers in their tracks and trigger a chain of events so stunning it would redefine the very meaning of family. The boy's name was Leo. At 17, he possessed the quiet, world-weary eyes of someone much older. His home was a group facility in Queens. His possessions fit into a single battered backpack, and his destination was a temporary custodial job at the airport, the kind of work that made you invisible. He moved through the glittering expanse of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4. Like a ghost, his worn-out sneakers a stark contrast to the polished marble floors that reflected the dazzling luxury boutiques. He was emptying a trash receptacle near the private jet terminal, a section he rarely worked when he heard it. Not the rumble of a Gulfstream G650 or the clipped announcements over the PA system, but a sound that was utterly out of place, a gasp. He looked up, his gaze colliding with two identical pairs of wide, chocolate-brown eyes. They belonged to twin girls no older than 10, dressed in matching navy blue pea coats and plaid skirts. Their hair was intricately braided, adorned with ribbons that matched their outfits. They stood beside a mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, attended to by a woman who radiated an aura of effortless power and wealth. This was the Rossi family, Isabella Rossi. Their mother was a formidable figure in New York's legal circles, known for her sharp intellect and even sharper pantsuits. She was on her phone, finalizing a merger, her voice calm and authoritative. Her husband, Richard Rossi, a placid man with a kind face and a portfolio in real estate, was overseeing the loading of their golf bags onto a cart. Leo's world and their world were not meant to intersect. They were parallel universes, separated by an unbridgeable chasm of circumstance. Yet the twins Maya and Mia were staring at him as if he were a phantom come to life. Maya, the bolder of the two, took a hesitant step forward. Her lower lip trembled. "Mia, look," she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. Mia simply nodded, her eyes locked on Leo's face. She clutched a worn teddy bear, her knuckles white. Leo, accustomed to being ignored, felt a strange prickle of unease. He averted his gaze, pushing the trash can along. He was just a cleaner, a part of the scenery. It was a mistake. They were looking at someone behind him. But they weren't. Isabella snapped her phone shut, her attention drawn by her daughter's strange silence. "Girls, what is it?" "The plane is ready." She followed their gaze to the boy in the janitor's uniform. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Don't stare, it's rude." "But, Mommy..." Maya's voice cracked, tears suddenly welling. "It's him." Before Isabella could question the cryptic statement, Maya broke free. She ran towards Leo, her polished shoes clicking frantically on the floor. Mia was right behind her, her teddy bear abandoned on the cold marble. They stopped a few feet from him, their chests heaving. Leo froze his hands, gripping the handle of the trash can. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, the bored business travelers, the curious flight attendants, the stoic security guards. Then came the cry that echoed through the terminal, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish and shocking certainty. "He's our brother!" Maya screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. Mia, her face a mess of tears and snot, joined the chorus. "He's our brother, don't you see? He's our brother!" The world stopped. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Phones previously used for scrolling through social media were now held aloft, recording. Isabella Rossi's face a moment ago, a mask of cool authority, had turned to stone. Richard dropped the strap of his carry-on, his mouth agape. "Girls, stop this nonsense immediately." Isabella's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise, but it was laced with a tremor of something else. Panic. She strode towards them, her heels clicking like gunshots. "Come here right now. You're causing a scene." She grabbed their arms, but they resisted their small bodies, anchored by the force of their conviction. "No. It's him. He has Daddy's eyes," Maya cried, looking from Leo to a framed photo of her mother and a man she'd never met that sat on her nightstand. Leo stood paralyzed, a deer in the headlights of an unfolding opera. Brother. The word was alien to him. He was an orphan, a ward of the state. His file at the group home was painfully thin. Leo surrendered at birth, parents unknown. He had no siblings. He had no one. A burly security guard, a man named Frank, began to move towards the scene. This was his turf, and this was a disruption. He saw a disheveled teenager and a hysterical wealthy family. The math in his head was simple. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Frank asked, his hand resting on his belt. Isabella composed herself, a chilling mask of composure sliding back over her features. "No, officer. My daughters are just overtired. A long trip." She shot a look at Leo that could freeze fire. A look that said, "You do not exist." But Maya and Mia were relentless. They clung to their mother, still pointing at Leo. "Please, Mummy. Don't you recognize him? Look at his face." Frank. The security guard turned his professional, suspicious gaze on Leo. "Son, what are you doing here? Are you bothering this family?" Leo finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "No, sir. I'm just working." He felt a profound, searing humiliation. He was being accused of something, though he wasn't sure what. He was just a poor boy, and they were a rich family. In the unwritten laws of public spaces, he was already guilty. Isabella pulled her daughters back, her grip like iron. "Richard, let's go. Now." Richard, however, was hesitating. He looked from his weeping daughters to the stunned, pale face of the boy. There was something in the boy's bone structure, the set of his jaw, that was vaguely, unsettlingly familiar. But it wasn't familiar to him. "Isabella, maybe we should just—" he started, but his wife cut him off with a glare. "We will do no such thing," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This is a pathetic, desperate attempt at something. A shakedown, perhaps. Frank, please remove him." Remove him. Leo's heart pounded in his chest. He had done nothing. The injustice of it all, the sudden bizarre accusation from the girls, the mother's cold dismissal, the guard's looming presence cracked something open inside him. He wasn't a criminal. He was just a person. As Frank took a step towards him, intending to escort him away, Mia let out a final, desperate wail. "Wait! His necklace!" Everyone paused. All eyes swiveled back to Leo. Tucked under the collar of his worn grey t-shirt was a thin, tarnished silver chain. It was the only thing of value he owned. He instinctively clutched it. "What about his necklace?" Isabella demanded, her patience gone. Mia, her voice trembling but clear, said, "It's the other half. The locket." "Mummy, you have one just like it." Isabella Rossi froze. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her own neck, where hidden beneath her silk blouse lay a delicate silver locket. A locket she never took off. A locket that held a secret she had buried 17 years ago. A secret she had protected with a fortress of lies. A secret that was now standing before her, emptying a trash can in the middle of JFK. The color drained from her face. Her composure, so meticulously maintained, shattered into a million pieces. She looked at Leo. Truly looked at him for the first time, not as a piece of scenery or a potential threat, but at his eyes, his mouth, the curve of his brow. It was like looking at a ghost. The private jet terminal with its hushed opulence was now utterly silent, save for the frantic beating of 4 different hearts. The world had tilted on its axis, and the stunning truth or the horrifying lie was about to be dragged into the light. The sterile silence of the airport manager's office was a stark contrast to the chaotic drama that had unfolded in the terminal. The space was all chrome glass and black leather, feeling less like a room and more like a holding cell for the wealthy. Mr. Harrison, the terminal manager, a man with a perpetually concerned expression and a thinning hairline, sat behind his large desk, looking as though he'd rather be handling a bomb threat. In one corner sat Isabella and Richard Rossi. Richard was attempting to comfort the twins, who were now hiccuping softly, their tear-streaked faces buried in his expensive suit jacket. Isabella sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. She was a statue, carved from ice, but tiny cracks were beginning to show. A muscle pulsed in her jaw. Her breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. And in a chair on the opposite side of the room, as far away as possible, sat Leo. Security guard Frank stood near the door, a silent, imposing sentry. Leo felt like a specimen under a microscope. He kept his head down, staring at the scuffed toes of his sneakers. The accusation, "He's our brother," still rang in his ears, a dissonant, impossible chord. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. "Mrs. Rossi," he began, his tone a careful blend of deference and officialdom. "I understand this is a delicate situation. My primary concern is the smooth operation of this terminal, and of course the well-being of all parties." He glanced nervously at Leo. The girls made a rather strong claim. Isabella's head snapped towards Saniam. "They are children," she said, her voice dangerously low. "They are imaginative. They have been fed a diet of fantasy stories and have a brother they miss dearly who is away at a camp. They clearly saw a passing resemblance and got carried away. It is a non-issue." "A non-issue," Richard interjected, his voice gentle but firm. "Isabella, look at them. They've never reacted this way before. And the locket." All eyes once again turned to Leo. He felt his throat tighten. His hand went to the chain around his neck. It had been his one constant, the single tangible link to a past he couldn't remember. The group home matron, Mrs. Gable, had given it to him when he was old enough to understand. "This was with you when you arrived, Leo," she had said. "It's yours. It's a piece of where you came from." It was a simple heart-shaped locket, tarnished with age. One side was smooth, designed to fit against another identical piece. It wouldn't open. He had spent countless nights tracing its shape, wondering about the other half. "Let me see it," Richard said, his voice soft, non-threatening. Leo hesitated. It was his only thing. But the expectant faces, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Slowly he pulled the chain over his head. The cheap metal felt heavy in his trembling hand. He held it out. Richard took it gently. The twins, Maya and Mia, peeked out from their father's embrace, their eyes wood and red-rimmed. Richard examined the locket, turning it over in his palm. "It's just an old piece of jewelry," Isabella said dismissively, not even glancing at it. "You could buy 1,000 of them in any street market." "Maybe," Richard murmured, his brow furrowed. "Isabella, honey, your locket." "Absolutely not," she snapped. "This is absurd. I will not indulge this fantasy." "Mummy, please," Maya begged, her voice rising again. "Just show him. If we're wrong, we'll say sorry. But we're not wrong." The pressure in the room was becoming unbearable. Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. Frank, by the door, crossed his arms. This was escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. Leo, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension. What does yours look like?" he asked, looking directly at Isabella. His question was so simple, so direct, that it disarmed her. For a second, her icy facade melted, revealing a flash of raw, unfiltered panic. Her eyes met his, and in them she saw more than just a passing resemblance to a ghost from her past. She saw the same stubborn set of his jaw, the same intensity in his gaze. With a shaking hand, she reached under her blouse and pulled out her own necklace. It was not a cheap imitation. It was a delicate, beautifully crafted piece of silver, gleaming under the office lights. It was the other half of a heart. Richard took his wife's locket. He held the two pieces in his open palm, Leo's tarnished and worn, Isabella's polished and pristine. He brought them together. They clicked, a perfect fit. The sound was a death knell to Isabella's denial. It was a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for 17 years. Mia let out a soft cry of vindication. "See, we told you." Richard stared at the joined locket, then at his wife, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Isabella, what is this? This is identical to the one you said your mother gave you." Isabella couldn't speak. She was staring at the locket, at the undeniable proof in her husband's hand. The fortress was crumbling. The ghost was real. This was when the poor boy did the first of his stunning acts. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet. Leo saw the woman, this powerful, terrifying woman, who had tried to have him thrown out, and he didn't see an enemy. He saw someone who was drowning. The look in her eyes was the same look he saw in the mirror some nights, the sheer terror of being utterly, completely lost. He stood up, took a step forward and spoke again, his voice still soft. "It's okay," he said. He wasn't talking to the twins or to Richard. He was talking to her. "You don't have to be scared." His empathy, his complete lack of accusation, in a moment when he was entitled to so much anger, was a shockwave. It stunned everyone into silence. Isabella flinched as if he had struck her. How could this boy, this stranger she had dismissed and tried to discard, offer her comfort? But the moment of raw humanity was shattered by the cold intrusion of legality. Isabella jolted back to herself, snatched the joined locket from Richard's hand, her composure returning like a steel shield. "This proves nothing," she declared, her voice regaining its sharp, attorney-like edge. "It's a coincidence. A remarkable one, I'll grant you, but a coincidence nonetheless. Lockets like these are mass-produced." She turned to Mr. Harrison. "My daughters are overwrought. I am taking them home. As for this boy," she gave Leo a look of pure ice. "I suggest your security team have a word with him about the dangers of targeting and harassing families for financial gain. We will not be pressing charges, but we expect him to be kept away from us." She stood up, pulling the bewildered twins with her. "Richard, we are leaving." Richard was torn. He looked at his wife's rigid back, at his daughter's confused faces, and at the boy, Leo, who stood alone, having offered a lifeline that was brutally slapped away. "But Isabella, the locket fit perfectly. We can't just walk away from this. Watch me," she said, her voice dripping with finality. But before they could reach the door, Leo did something else. He reached into the back pocket of his worn jeans and pulled out a small, tattered wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a photograph, its edges soft and frayed from years of handling. It was his most prized possession, even more so than the locket. It was a faded picture of a young woman. She was beautiful, with a wild mane of dark hair and a smile that was both shy and radiant. She was sitting on a park bench, bathed in autumn sunlight, cradling a tiny blanket-wrapped bundle in her arms. "I don't want any money," Leo said, his voice shaking now, not with fear, but with a deep, resonant emotion. I just wanted to know who she was." He held out the photograph. Richard took it first. He frowned. "She's very beautiful. I've never seen her before." He passed it to Isabella. Isabella Rossi took the photograph, her expression one of weary impatience. She glanced down at it, ready to dismiss it as just another part of the scheme. And then she stopped breathing. The world tilted again, this time more violently. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, terrifying white. Her hand trembled so violently, the photograph rattled. The woman in the picture was not Isabella Rossi, the powerful lawyer. It was Izzy Vance, the 19-year-old art student with a messy ponytail, paint-stained fingers, and a heart full of reckless, impossible dreams. And the man who had taken that photo, the man whose eyes now stared back at her from Leo's face, was David Miller, the love of her life. The man she had been told was dead. The father of the baby she had been told was born silent. The photograph slipped from her numb fingers, fluttering to the floor of the silent, gilded cage. Her carefully constructed world, her perfect family, her 17 years of secrets had just been obliterated by a ghost in a faded picture. 17 years ago, Isabella Rossi wasn't Isabella Rossi. She was Izzy Vance, a scholarship student at NYU with a fierce talent for painting and a future that felt as boundless as the Greenwich Village sky. Her family owed money from Connecticut, had reluctantly agreed to her art phase, confident she would eventually come to her senses and enroll in law school at Yale, the path her father had ordained. Izzy, however, had other plans. Her life was measured in tubes of oil paint, the smell of turpentine, and the intoxicating freedom of the New York City in the fall. And at the heart of that freedom was David Miller. David was everything her family despised. He was a musician, a guitarist with long, calloused fingers and a voice that was somehow both raw and gentle. He played for change in Washington Square Park, his open guitar case lined with a few crumpled dollar bills and a lot of hope. His eyes, a deep, soulful brown, held a galaxy of dreams that mirrored her own. They met when she was sketching the arch, and he was playing a melancholic folk song that seemed to pull the heart right out of her chest. Their love story was a whirlwind, a classic village romance written in late-night conversations on fire escapes, shared slices of cheap pizza, and the passionate collision of art and music. He wrote songs about the amber flecks in her eyes. She painted portraits of him where his soul seemed to burn right through the canvas. For Izzy, David was not a detour from her life's path. He was the path. She bought them matching silver lockets from a street vendor on St. Mark's Place. They were cheap, probably not even real silver, but to her, they were more precious than diamonds. They were two halves of one heart, a cheesy romantic gesture that felt profound and real in the bubble of their love. Then the bubble burst. Izzy discovered she was pregnant. Her initial terror was quickly replaced by a fierce, protective joy. She told David one evening under the flickering gaslights of a small cafe. She expected him to be scared to run. Instead, he knelt on the sticky floor of the cafe, took her hand, and asked her to marry him. He wasn't scared. He was ecstatic. They would be a family. A poor, struggling family of artists, but a family nonetheless. That was the dream. The reality was a phone call to her parents. The word disappointment didn't begin to cover their reaction. Her father, a man who wielded influence like a weapon, was cold and surgical. Her mother was hysterical. They saw only scandal, a promising future derailed by a penniless busker. They gave her an ultimatum: come home, let them handle the situation, and erase this catastrophic mistake, or be cut off completely financially and emotionally. David begged her to stay. "We'll manage, Izzy. I'll get a real job. I'll do anything. We don't need them." But Izzy, for all her bohemian bravado, was terrified. She was 19, pregnant, and the threat of being utterly alone, of bringing a child into abject poverty, was a weight she couldn't bear. She loved David, but her father's voice, a voice that had dictated her reality for her entire life, was a powerful poison in her ear. He promised her that if she came home, they would help her. They would set her and the baby up in a small apartment, provide support, and allow her to continue her studies after the birth. It was a lie, but it was a beautifully packaged one. With a broken heart, she made the worst decision of her life. She told David she needed some space, that she was going home to Connecticut for a few weeks to figure things out. He gave her the photograph, the one he'd taken of her in the park, just days after she told him she was pregnant. "So you don't forget us," he'd said, his voice thick with unshed tears. The weeks in Connecticut turned into a prison sentence. Her phone was taken away. Her emails were monitored. Her father's help was a systematic process of isolation and psychological warfare. He told her David had cleared out his apartment, that he'd taken the money they'd sent him to disappear, and had left town without a second thought. He showed her faked letters and bank statements. Izzy, heartbroken and hormonal, believed him. The man she loved had abandoned her. The birth was difficult, premature. She was heavily sedated. When she awoke, groggy and empty, her parents were there. Her father, his face a grim mask, told her the baby, a boy, had been stillborn. He hadn't survived the traumatic birth. Izzy's world ended. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that hollowed her out. The love, the baby, the future she'd briefly dreamed of it, was all gone, turned to ash. A part of her died in that sterile white hospital room. The girl who returned to NYU was a ghost. She abandoned her art, which was now too painful to even look at. She enrolled in pre-law. She became the daughter her father had always wanted. She buried Izzy Vance and became Isabella. She met Richard Rossi 2 years later. He was kind, stable, and safe. He was everything David wasn't. He knew she'd had a difficult past and a tragic loss, but he never pressed for details. He was her harbor after the storm. She built a new life, a perfect life. A successful career, a loving husband, 2 beautiful daughters. She never took off the locket, the one half of the heart. To her it was a tombstone, a memorial to the baby boy she had lost and the girl she used to be. She never knew David had the other half. She never knew her son was alive. Her parents had orchestrated the entire lie. They had used their immense resources to have the baby healthy and strong whisked away and put into the anonymous state system. A surrender at birth, no names attached. They had paid doctors falsified records and erased their grandson from existence to save their family from a perceived shame. They had told Isabella her son was dead, and in a final cruel twist, they had used their contacts to ensure David Miller, who had been frantically searching for Izzy, was arrested on trumped-up charges, leading him to believe Izzy's family had framed him to keep him away forever. He had eventually given up broken and left the city believing the love of his life had chosen her family's money over him. Now standing in the airport manager's office, the faded photograph was not just a picture. It was an excavation. It had unearthed the tomb she had so carefully constructed around her heart. The boy Leo was not a stranger. He was the living, breathing embodiment of her greatest love and her deepest grief. He was the son she had mourned for 17 years. Her denial wasn't just about protecting her current life. It was about protecting her sanity. To accept him as her son meant accepting the monumental, soul-shattering truth her parents had lied to her. Her baby hadn't died, and she had spent 17 years mourning a ghost, while her living son grew up alone, a ward of the state. It meant that her entire adult life was built on a foundation of unimaginable cruelty and deception. The look on her face was not just shock. It was the agony of a woman whose entire reality had just been ripped apart at the seams. Richard, seeing his wife's complete and utter breakdown over a simple photograph, finally understood. This was not a con. This was not a coincidence. This was a reckoning. He bent down and picked up the photograph. He looked at the young, smiling woman, then at his wife, the powerful lawyer who now looked like a terrified, broken girl. He looked at Leo, the boy with the musician's eyes, who stood there with a quiet dignity that defied his circumstances. He made a decision. He put a protective arm around his wife, who had started to tremble uncontrollably. He looked at Mr. Harrison. "This is no longer airport business," Richard said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "This is a family matter, a private family matter." He then turned to Leo, his expression softening. "Son, I don't know what is happening here, but we're going to find out. I promise you that." He was no longer just a placid husband. He was a man fighting to hold his fracturing family together, even as a ghost from Washington Square Park threatened to tear it all down. The days that followed were a blur of strained silence and hushed, frantic phone calls. The Rossi family did not board their private jet to the Caribbean. They returned to their palatial Upper East Side townhouse, a home that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a pressure cooker. Leo, by a fragile, unspoken agreement brokered by Richard, was not sent back to the group home. He was placed in a nearby hotel suite, paid for by Richard, with the promise that they would sort this out. It was the nicest room he had ever stayed in, but he had never felt more alone. Isabella locked herself in her master bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone. The formidable lawyer was gone, replaced by a recluse haunted by the ghost of Izzy Vance. She was trapped between two impossible truths. The son she had mourned was alive, and the parents she had trusted had betrayed her in the most monstrous way imaginable. Her father, when Richard finally reached him by phone, was belligerent and dismissive, spouting denials that were as hollow as they were cruel. The only people who seemed to see any clarity in the situation were Maya and Mia. To them it was simple. They had found their brother. They didn't understand the adult complexities, the lies or the pain. They only knew that Leo, the boy from the airport, belonged with them. They begged Richard to let them see him to bring him home. Richard, caught in the eye of the hurricane, became the family's reluctant anchor. He hired a private investigator to discreetly look into Leo's origins and more pointedly into the events surrounding Isabella's stillbirth 17 years ago. And he arranged for the one thing that could cut through the lies and give them an undeniable truth, a DNA test. A medical professional came to Leo's hotel to take a cheek swab. He submitted to it quietly, his face betraying no emotion. He did the same for Isabella at the townhouse, who complied with the chilling detachment of a defendant submitting evidence. The wait for the results, a period of 7 to 10 business days, was excruciating. During this time, Richard made a bold move. Against Isabella's silent, stony disapproval, he brought Maya and Mia to Leo's hotel. The girls, carrying a bag filled with chocolate chip cookies and a brand-new sketchbook, were hesitant at first. Leo, equally shy, let them into the sterile suite. For a few awkward minutes, they all just stood there. Then Mia, the quieter twin, walked up to Leo and held out the sketchbook. "We thought, since our mum liked to paint, maybe you do too," she said softly. The simple, thoughtful gesture broke the ice. Leo took the sketchbook, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. "Thank you," he said. They spent the next hour talking, the girls chattering about their school, their friends, and their dog Buster. Leo, in turn, told them about Mrs. Gable from the group home and his dream of one day seeing the ocean. He didn't talk about the hardship or the loneliness. He just talked. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was being seen not as a problem or a charity case, but as a person, as a brother. The preliminary report from the private investigator came back 3 days later, and it was devastating. It confirmed the lies, the cover-up, the falsified records. It included a statement from a retired nurse who, plagued by guilt for decades, admitted to her role in the deception orchestrated by Isabella's father. The proof was irrefutable. Richard sat Isabella down in their living room, the lavish space feeling cold and impersonal. He laid out the evidence, his voice heavy with sorrow. "He did it, Izzy," he said, using her old name for the first time. "Your father. He took your son from you." The dam broke. Isabella let out a raw, keening wail of such profound agony that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. It was the sound of 17 years of suppressed grief, of a mother's stolen love, of a daughter's ultimate betrayal. She wept for the baby she thought was dead, for the boy who grew up without her, and for the woman she might have been. Richard held her, letting her cry until she had no tears left, until she was just a shivering, broken shell. The next day, she did something she hadn't done in a week. She left her room. She put on a simple dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked older, fragile. She asked Richard to drive her to Leo's hotel. Leo was surprised to see her standing at his door, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. He let her in, his heart pounding. He expected an apology, an explanation, maybe even an accusation. He was prepared for anger, for tears, for a dramatic scene. Isabella stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice raspy. "There are no words. What they did, what I didn't know, what you went through, She trailed off, choking on the enormity of it all. "I know you must hate me." Leo looked at this woman, stripped of all her power and prestige. He saw the years of pain etched onto her face. He saw the guilt that was consuming her. And in that moment, the poor boy did the thing that would truly stun them all. It wasn't about the locket or the photograph. It was about a grace that no one could have anticipated. He walked over to the table where the sketchbook Mia had given him lay open. He had drawn something. It was a rough but surprisingly skillful sketch of a woman's face, the face from the faded photograph, his mother Izzy smiling in the sun. He picked up the sketchbook, turned to Isabella, and held it out for her to see. "This whole time," Leo said, his voice, steady and clear, filled with an unearthly calm, "all I ever wanted was to know that she was happy when she had me, that I wasn't a mistake." He looked from the drawing to Isabella's shattered face. "You were just a kid, and you were scared, just like I've been." He took a small breath and delivered the final stunning blow, not of anger, but of absolution. "I don't hate you," he said. "How can I hate my mother for something that was stolen from her?" He then closed the distance between them and hesitantly wrapped his arms around her. It was a clumsy, awkward hug. Two strangers, a mother and a son, separated by a lifetime of lies, finally touching for the first time. But in that embrace, 17 years of pain began to dissolve. Isabella, who had been holding herself together with sheer will, finally let go. She sagged against him, burying her face in his shoulder, and her quiet, shaky sobs were not of grief this time, but of release. Leo's act stunned everyone, because it wasn't about claiming his birthright, demanding restitution, or seeking revenge. It was an act of radical empathy. He saw her pain above his own. In a situation where he was the ultimate victim, he chose to be the healer. He gave her the one thing she thought she had lost forever, and didn't deserve forgiveness. When Richard, waiting anxiously in the car, received a text from Isabella an hour later, "Come up, bring the girls," he knew something had shifted. He walked into the hotel suite to find a scene that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Maya and Mia were sitting on the couch on either side of Leo, showing him pictures on their phone. And Isabella was sitting in a nearby chair, watching them, a single peaceful tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't smiling, not yet. But the ice was gone. In its place was the first fragile bloom of hope. The DNA results arrived 2 days later. They were, of course, a formality. The truth had already been found, not in a lab, but in a hotel room, in a stunning act of grace from a boy who had every right to be angry, but chose love instead. The results confirmed it with a 99.999% probability. Leo was the biological son of Isabella Rossi. The legal document, stark and impersonal in its courier envelope, was the first official brick in the foundation of Leo's new life. The court order finalized the amendment to his birth certificate and his legal adoption by Richard Rossi. He was now in the eyes of the law. Leo David Rossi. The name felt foreign on his tongue, a strange combination of a past he never knew, and a future he couldn't comprehend. David for the ghost father with the soulful eyes. Rossi for the kind, steady man who looked at him not with pity, but with a quiet promise of belonging. Moving into the Rossi townhouse on the Upper East Side was less like a homecoming and more like stepping onto a different planet. The silence was the first thing that struck him. At the group home, noise was a constant, the drone of a television, the shouts of other boys, the slam of doors. Here the silence was a physical presence, absorbed by thick Persian rugs and ceilings that soared 2 stories high. His worn-out sneakers, which had scuffed their way through the city's toughest neighborhoods, seemed to hesitate on the polished marble of the entryway, as if aware they were trespassing. Richard gave him the tour, his voice gentle, trying to bridge the chasm of wealth and experience between them. "This is the main living area. The kitchen is through there. Feel free to grab anything, anytime. Our home is your home now, Leo." Leo just nodded his backpack, feeling ridiculously small and shabby in the cavernous space. They ascended a grand, curving staircase to the second floor. "And this," Richard said, pushing open a door at the end of the hall, "is your room." It was bigger than his entire shared room at the facility. It had a large window that overlooked a garden courtyard, a real wooden desk, a bookshelf filled with new unopened books, and a bed with a fluffy duvet that looked like a cloud. It was a perfect room for a boy. But Leo felt a surge of panic. It was too much, too clean, too empty of his own history. He was an imposter in a prince's chambers. The first few weeks were a delicate, painful dance of adjustment. Isabella, having unleashed a lifetime of fury in a single cataclysmic phone call that severed all ties with her parents, retreated into a cocoon of fragile introspection. She had taken an indefinite leave from her law firm, the formidable litigator replaced by a woman who seemed to be relearning how to breathe. She would often just sit in the living room watching Leo with an expression of such profound sorrow and wonder that he would have to look away. They were mother and son, yet they were strangers, their shared history, a black hole of 17 years. Their conversations were brief and stilted, full of unspoken questions and unimaginable pain. "Did you sleep well?" she'd ask. "Yes." He'd answer, unable to explain that he often lay awake for hours, overwhelmed by the silence. It was Richard who became the family's gentle engineer, working tirelessly to construct bridges over the chasms of trauma. He recognized Leo's discomfort, the way the boy's shoulders were always tensed, ready for a blow that would never come. He didn't push. He invited. One evening, as Richard was getting ready for a charity gala, he found Leo hovering awkwardly in the doorway of his dressing room. "Everything okay?" Richard asked, fumbling with his bow tie. Leo just shrugged, pointing at the knot of silk. I never learned how to do that." Richard smiled, a warm, genuine expression. "Well, that's an easy fix. Come on in." He undid his tie, and standing behind Leo in front of a large mirror, he patiently guided Leo's hesitant fingers through the intricate loops and folds. Around the back, up through the middle, and tuck it through the loop you made. See perfect. For a moment, reflected in the mirror, they were just a father and a son, sharing a timeless, simple ritual. It was a small moment, but for Leo, it was monumental. The true ambassadors of his new life, however, were Maya and Mia. Unburdened by the weight of the past, they saw no awkwardness, no tragedy. They saw only their brother found at last. They stormed the fortress of his solitude with the irresistible force of childhood innocence. They decided his room was too boring and spent an entire Saturday taping their own crayon drawings all over his walls, vibrant, chaotic portraits of the 5 of them, their dog Buster, and a very wobbly-looking son. They dragged him into the kitchen to be the official taste tester for their disastrous baking experiments, and insisted he was the only one who could do the monster voices correctly during their bedtime stories. They were the laughter that began to chase the shadows from the silent house, their unconditional love, the healing balm the family so desperately needed. The turning point came on a crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 2 months after his arrival. Isabella found Leo in the sunroom, a space at the back of the house, bathed in warm golden light. He was sitting at a small table, the sketchbook Mia had given him open. His brow furrowed in deep concentration. A charcoal pencil moved with surprising speed and confidence in his hand. At his feet, Buster the golden retriever snored softly. She pulled up a chair, her movements quiet so as not to startle him. For a long while she just watched. He was sketching Buster, but it was more than a simple drawing. He captured the essence of the dog, the contented weight of his sleeping form, the twitch of his paws as he dreamed. He had her eye for detail, her innate talent. The gift she had buried 17 years ago was alive and well in him. He was a musician, Isabella said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Leo's hand stilled. He looked up, his brown eyes. David's eyes wide and questioning. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation about him. Your father. She clarified the words, feeling both foreign and sacred. He would sit for hours in Washington Square Park, just his guitar and a handful of songs. He said he could see the music in things, in the way a leaf fell in the rhythm of people walking. I think you have that. You see things, the way they really are. Leo swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. Tell me about him, he asked, his voice raw. Isabella took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to open a door she had kept locked for nearly 2 decades. Come with me, she said, standing. She led him up to her study, a room he had never entered. It was immaculate, lined with law books and legal awards. But she didn't go to the shelves. She went to a large antique cedar chest tucked away in a corner. Kneeling, she unlocked it. The scent of old paper and dried flowers filled the air. This was the tomb of Izzy Vance. One by one, she pulled out the artifacts of a life she thought was over. A faded ticket stub from a concert at the bitter end, a pressed, brittle flower, a handful of black and white photo booth strips showing a laughing, carefree young couple making silly faces, and at the very bottom, a worn leather guitar pick stamped with the initial D. He was brilliant, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears as she handed Leo the guitar pick. And he was kind. His laugh, it could make the worst day feel bright. He wrote a song for me, you know. He said my eyes had bits of gold in them like tiger's eye. He was a romantic, a dreamer. She told Leo everything. Not the tragedy, not the lies, but the love story. She spoke of their shared dreams, their passion for art and music, their tiny, perfect world in a small Greenwich Village apartment. As she spoke, the ghost of David Miller, the tragic figure Leo had constructed in his mind, began to transform. He became a man of laughter, music, and immense love. Isabella wasn't just giving Leo his history. She was giving him his father, and in doing so, she was reclaiming a part of herself she thought was lost forever. The following week, Richard announced they were having a new family portrait taken. The mood on the day of the photo shoot was a mixture of nervous energy and quiet anticipation. The photographer, a brisk professional, arranged them in the formal living room. Richard stood tall and proud behind Isabella's chair. Isabella, her face relaxed in a soft, authentic smile, placed her hands on the shoulders of Maya and Mia, who sat on either side of her. And the young man, the photographer said, could you stand right behind your sisters between your parents? Leo moved into position. He felt Mia's small hand slip into his, her grip tight and reassuring. He looked up and saw his reflection in the ornate mirror above the fireplace. He saw the 5 of them, a constellation of broken and healed pieces, now assembled into a single, cohesive whole. Later that evening, in the quiet of his own room, a room that now felt like his, Leo stood before his dresser. He picked up the new portrait, the glossy image of his new reality of his family. He then picked up the old, faded photograph of Izzy Vance, the 19-year-old girl with a radiant smile cradling him in a park bathed in sunlight. He placed them side by side. The boy in the blanket and the young man in the portrait. The lost mother and the found one. One represented a love that was stolen by a terrible lie. The other a love that was reclaimed by an impossible truth. Looking at them together, he finally understood. He wasn't a replacement or an addition. He was the missing piece. His name, Leo David Rossi, was no longer foreign. It was his story. And for the first time in his life, it was whole. The story of Leo and the Rossi family is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most earth-shattering truths are screamed by the voices we least expect. It shows us that beneath the surface of wealth, power, and perfectly curated lives, there can lie deep, unhealed wounds. But more than that, it is a testament to the incredible power of forgiveness. In a moment where he was entitled to rage and bitterness, a young boy who had nothing chose to give the one thing that could heal everyone grace. His stunning act of empathy didn't just reunite a family. It rebuilt one from the ashes of a devastating lie. What do you think is the most powerful form of forgiveness? Have you ever witnessed a moment that completely changed your understanding of what family means? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas that touch the heart. Thank you for watching.